We'd like to take a moment to thank a sponsor that helps make these videos possible. Raid Shadow Legends. If you haven't heard of this game yet, but want to enjoy a truly high-quality RPG strategy gaming experience right on your smartphone, look no further than Raid Shadow Legends. There are millions of champion combinations and tactics to take on raid bosses, go on dungeon runs, campaign battles, and player versus player arena matches. Use our QR code or the links below in the description to download Raid to your smartphone or PC. You can pick up the game anytime and enjoy some strategizing. I like to pop on and play a bit between editing interviews and long sessions of listening to overnight audio. I like that the game is simple enough but features an impressive amount of collectibles, challenges, and champions to strive for. One such challenge is Doom Tower. In order to conquer it, you'll have to gather a strong team of champions in order to deal with tougher boss challenges. A team with specialists is recommended. This month, Raid just released some new features, including Awakening and a new brutal dungeon, the Iron Twins Fortress. The big news is that Raid just released a legendary version of their crowd favorite champion Death Knight. This formidable character is powerful and poised to help you win. The best part is that he's free for everybody. Just enter the promo code DKRises into the game and be sure to play Raid for 7 days between now and October 27th. There's never not a good time to get started as a new player. Use our link or scan the QR code right here and get a free starter pack with a free champion, Vergis, and this in-game loot. You'll find these rewards in your inbox for the next 30 days only. Over the last year and a half that we've been doing Bigfoot Beyond the Trail videos, we've gone on quite a few expeditions and adventures. We've traveled far and wide, from coast to coast and in between, from the magical rainforests of the Pacific Northwest to the swamplands of Florida, from the majestic Rocky Mountains of the Intermountain West to the endless forests of the Northeast. We've been in some amazing, wild, as well as potentially dangerous situations, with some being better than others. Along the way, we've encountered all sorts of wildlife, most of it being with identifiable species. When it comes to Sasquatch, while we can't be 100% certain, we've had a few encounters that classify as unusual. What we have come across time and time again, regardless of which part of the country we are in, is stories of Bigfoot encounters from eyewitnesses and researchers alike. Normal folks that are certain of what they experienced. Given we have such a wide catalog of interviews at this point, I figured I might share a few compelling encounters and retellings of other stories through interviews. With such wide geographical distributions of these encounters, I found it intriguing the types of behavior and observations made by eyewitnesses.
I, at times, will do things like bridge the subject of just letting people know that I have an interest. And sometimes it generates ridicule, sometimes it generates interest. But there have been times where that interest has given me some good insights. One in particular, a friend of mine was a hotshot on a crew, and I believe it was somewhere near the Plumas National Forest. And at the time, he was an emergency medical technician on his crew, and he was called to the top of the fire to help with an injury. So he'd gotten to the top of the fire, and there were two young Native American firefighters from the Southwest, and one had basically been knocked out, and so he was checking him over. Well, he needed to find out, well, what happened? How did this occur? Well, apparently they were at the top of the fire working on mopping up, what we call, basically kind of safening up the fire line. They heard a noise and they looked up, and what they said was this monkey man was in the tree, and this monkey man jumped down out of the tree and ran off on two legs. And it so frightened them that one of them ran right into a tree and knocked himself out. So yeah, it was kind of an interesting story that would cause somebody to injure themselves because they were so frightened of something. So
Most of the Bigfoot stories that have come out of the Bridgewater Triangle tend to be towards that Hockomock Swamp region, which is about 10 miles to the north of the Freetown State Forest. Two separate locations, both within this 200 square mile triangle. But most of the cryptid stuff seems to emanate from the Hockomock Swamp region.
So in regard to the history of Bigfoot, I cited it as beginning in December of 1969. And that's when the Bridgewater State College, which was known as the Teachers College then, some female residents in a dormitory, some co-eds, and I can only imagine the terror that they suffered. And they looked out of the dormitory into the tree line, and there was this 7 to 8 foot tall a shadow of a creature. Not some sort of a pervert out in the woods. It was ape-like. And several girls saw that. And that really kicks off the spate of Bigfoot sightings in the late 1960s, early 1970s.
What people were reporting as a bear walking on two legs, and they had this joint state police, local police task force trying to chase down this bear.
The police from Bridgewater, West Bridgewater, and from areas of East Bridgewater all were reporting sightings of man-beast anthropoids, of these bipedal creatures. And the police were concerned because these calls were coming from people from all walks of life, all ages, people with really steadfast backgrounds, some high school kids, hikers, and essentially they were finding footprints in their backyard. They were finding tomatoes being half-eaten. There's one story of a Bigfoot being seen eating a pumpkin in a crouched position. And one night a cruiser was sitting out back. Yes, ma'am, we got the details. Yep, you saw some sort of hairy ape. Yep, Yogi Bear's out there getting picnic baskets. Well, he's on watch. And suddenly he feels his cruiser rock back and forth, and he puts his foot instinctively on the brake, and behind, with the glow of the red lights, is a hairy torso.
And he said the thing was, he saw in the rearview mirror, it was kind of strange because it was dark, but it actually picked up the back of his cruiser and dropped it.
And he said what he called, he didn't want to be ridiculed, a bipedal bear, run around the side of the house, and he took a searchlight and he saw it.
And so he considered retreat the better part of valor, and he went back to headquarters. We talked on the phone. I never actually met him, but he told me pretty much that was pretty much all there was to it. That it picked up the back of his cruiser. So obviously it must have been extremely strong, and all he could see in the rearview mirror with the low light as it was just his hair. He wasn't aware that other officers had witnessed that, but he's still very, very reluctant to talk about that.
We never were able to talk to the officer when we did the Bridgewater Triangle documentary. He had long since passed. And I'll never forget one screening in Bridgewater when we were screening the film when it first came out. The daughter of that cop showed up at the screening, and she's like, "That was my father. That he was the cop who, cruiser was lifted up off the back by the Bigfoot creature." She said that absolutely happened. That wasn't a fabricated story.
You talk to police officers around here, and they've said that if you can get them to admit it, they've seen all kinds of strange things.
How many stories would you say in general?
I've lost count. Probably between 200 and 300 eyewitness stories from Colorado. And our store just gives people a convenient place to come and talk where they feel like they won't be mocked, and we'll listen to them. And it's not uncommon for us to have a couple come up to the counter, and the husband starts to tell a story, and the wife looking at him like, "I've never heard that story." And he says, "Well, I didn't think you believed me, so I never told you." And it could have happened 10, 20 years before. But yeah, there's tons of stories. I mean, the one visual encounter I had was at Wellington Lake, which is a very popular tourist lake, about 15 miles from here maybe, and full of campers in the summer. And we've probably, over the last 8 years, we've probably had maybe 7 or 8 stories of visual sightings and at least as many vocalizations. I was fishing at the lake early in the morning, 6 in the morning. Everyone was asleep. And there's a big rock mountain they call the Castle that dominates the end of the lake, and some of the rock outcrops come around the side. And so I just cast a fly, and I look up, and about 150, 200 yards above me, there's a big rock outcropping that I've climbed to, and this Sasquatch was standing there looking down. It was huge, it was all one color. There was no question in my mind what it was when I saw it. And of course, as luck would have it, a fish grabbed my fly. I turned my attention, looked at the fly, looked back up, literally that fast, and it was gone. I mean, faster than it could walk back into the trees, which were probably 20 yards behind it. It was just there, and then it was gone. And so I think now, why did I take my eyes off of it for a stupid fish, you know? But at the time, you just do what comes to you. But we've had my research partner, he had a sighting on this trail. He had been walking through the woods between two of our gifting sites. He heard a bark, thought it was a dog, looked around, didn't see a dog anywhere. Came through the woods to the trail, was walking up the trail, heard the same bark again behind him, turned around, and he said he saw what looked like a big black tree stump in the middle of the trail where there isn't a tree stump. And he was trying to figure it out, and he said maybe 2 seconds later, the Sasquatch turned and went into the woods, glided into the woods, and disappeared, literally disappeared from his view. Even though when I reenacted it, he could see me going through the trees for quite a distance. He said that thing went into the trees and was gone. Ironically, like 2 weeks after that, I brought a friend out here late. We were here till about 1 in the morning, and we were walking back out, and I heard the exact same barked behind us. We both turned around. She had the night vision scope, but it was a full moon, and it, for whatever reason, chose not to step into the trail. It stayed in the trees, but definitely wanted us to know it was there because it barked at us the same way that it barked at him.
Well, it's in central Maine, which is a big hotspot for reported Maine Bigfoot encounters. And since I was younger, myself, my family have had just these strange experiences. So it's like, it's not just me being a kid out in the woods and being like, oh, I heard a stick snap, it's a Bigfoot. We've heard, so for example, my mom and I were sitting around a campfire right outside the cabin, and I think it was around midnight. A lot of things happen around midnight for some reason. And we just, in the middle of the woods, we just randomly start hearing just wood knocks, just random wood hitting wood. And we were like, okay, there's no one else around here. So what was that? It's midnight. The community's fairly old, at least around where we live. It's older people, so they're not up. So it was just super, that's really the first thing that happened. I was like, okay, that's kind of strange. Something strange is going on. And then a couple years later, my dad and I was out with him hunting in the early morning, and we're sitting there, and we just hear, again, like this wood hitting wood, just clear as day. Just it startled him because he's been hunting his entire life, and he didn't know what it was. So that's when I kind of noticed. I was like, your reaction's kind of weird to that, so that means something's up. And then another one of the encounters happened at night, which around midnight, I was walking, we live along, the cabin's along a dirt road, and I was walking along with a spotlight looking for animals and stuff, because there's deer, bear, everything out there. And I hear this big animal to the left of me walking up the road, and just this big mass just moving through the brush, you know, just like pushing through. It wasn't like, I don't know, like a person, like, you know, pushing stuff out of the way. It was like something huge just forcing its way through the brush, like not trying to be quiet. I went and got my dad. I was like, there's an animal here. It's coming up. If it's a moose or a bear or something, we could see it. If we go up to the landlord's house and sit on their back porch, which they'd be fine with, and we have the spotlights. So we do that. We're sitting on the back of the porch, and between us and the forest is a creek, and we hear it. We start to hear it. We hear it going like shh, like, and we're like, oh, it's a moose or something like that. And then we hear it step into the water, right? And it's pitch dark. We have our lights. We don't see it, but it's a low creek, like so clearly. This is why it was so weird, because with quadrupedal animals, you can tell that they're even when they're stepping in water or brush or anything, you can sort of tell that it's like four legs. This was very clearly like someone walking at the beach in shallow water, where it's like they step in, out of the water. So it was definitely something bipedal, and we didn't hear it because the brush was obstructing where it was, unfortunately. But we heard it. It was just step in the water until it went into the brush and down back into the woods. We were thinking about it the next day, and we were like, oh, it could have been a bear, like up on its hind legs. But we were like, they don't step like that. They don't step like a person does. They kind of like, shuffle when they're on their legs. But that was definitely something like, it sounded like a person. We have our neighbors who live right next to us. They watch our house. They can see our house, our cabin from their kitchen window. This was right after we left to actually do an investigation. We left, and I think about a couple days later, our neighbors actually called us and said, so we thought someone was trying to break into your camp. And we were like, oh, okay. And they were like, yeah, we thought it was a person. Then we noticed they were all dressed in black. So we were like, oh, it's a bear. And then they were like, no, it's not a bear, because they see it stand up and walk across the yard back into the woods. And then they were like, it was a Bigfoot. So, yeah.
Actually, the first time I actually really started paying attention to it was Chuck Dracy, God rest his soul, he's passed now. The one day he was walking down on our 8th hole and saw a gray creature that he described. And he said, I am never going to walk down there again. And our 8th hole's in a valley, and it's got 2 creeks that join another creek and heavy wooded area. And he claims up by the green, whatever it was in the woods, looked at him, saw him, and he goes, it wasn't a bear. He goes, it was big. And then several years later, my son was taking my nephew to his house and comes back and is kind of acting different and said he saw something. And he didn't know what it was, but it was big and hairy, and it was walking across the tree line at the back of the driving range. So he took us out there and he described it. So one of us walked up there, and it's like, how big was it? And basically he said, it was way bigger than you, Dad. The next day we cast a footprint that we found in a sand trap down on the 8th hole again, where Chuck had witnessed the first sighting that I knew of.
It was April 12th, 2013, 8-ish p.m.
As you can see, it's not real clear, but the big toe's here. And we went to, there's the print in the sand trap. In the sand trap, we just had a spring rain, thunderstorm. And the sand trap was probably 12 to 15 feet wide. So it was like right in the middle. So whatever it was had a stride long enough to only leave one print in the sand. Right. And when we walked on the sand, it left nothing. We couldn't even leave a print with our feet. So.
But if you look at however it jumped, like most of the pressure was like right on here with big toe
you can see
and
the heel
everything.
hit. And small toes didn't make an imprint because, like I said, the sand was very hard. And the sand trap was probably 12 to 15 feet wide. So it was like right in the middle. So whatever it was had a stride long enough to only leave one print in the sand. Right. And when we walked on the sand, it left nothing. We couldn't even leave a print with our feet. And then we got an exchange student from a few years later, exchange student from Germany. And we were talking about it, and he's making fun of us. And he's like, oh, stuff like that's not real, stuff like that's not real. And the one night he was going home, we only live 600 yards from the clubhouse, and he was going home right before dark on a golf cart. And when Jackie got home, my wife got home, he was in the fetal position on the couch saying, the creature, I saw the creature. and he described it as a big hairy being. And then the last sighting, I was coming home one night late, again, general vicinity, and I saw what I didn't know what I saw. It was actually between two of my neighbors' houses. I thought, first of all, I thought it was a ghost. And then I go and I tell my wife, I'm like, I don't believe in ghosts, but what I saw was a ghost. It was something. And she's like, how big was it? And I'm like, told her, and she's like, that's the gray one Chuck saw. So right away, I ran to the back porch, and it was, whatever it was down in the woods behind her house. But the weirdest part about that experience was I lost my emotions. I started uncontrollably crying. I wasn't sad, I wasn't afraid, I wasn't anything, but I could not stop crying. And I felt nothing. I mean, my emotions were weird. And I actually went out, I mean, I ran off the porch going down and looking at it. My wife's like, what are you doing? And there was no fear, there was no anything, but the emotion was the weirdest thing I've ever experienced in my life.
Can you tell us that?
Yeah, so this story came to me probably at least 12, 13 years ago at least, told to me by the gentleman who spoke to the two gold miners. This again was up in the Willow Creek area. Lots of gold claims up there, lots of small time. You'll see the signs when you go up there, gold claims, do not enter private property. And then anyway, this friend of mine, he knew these two gentlemen who had been gold mining out there for years. And after he spoke to them, about his incident, they opened up about their incident where I don't know if they were hiking. I think the story was they were hiking a while and they stopped and they were eating lunch. They were still for about 20 minutes and they heard some rustling around, and they didn't have to move too far to see. And what they basically said is they watched two Sasquatch sitting, just kind of sitting there like a bear would in these bushes, basically taking the leaves and pulling them out, of their mouth like a great ape would. And again, I want to say 12 years ago or more, there wasn't a lot of details like this available. It just seemed really odd for someone to make that up. But again, that intrigued me, and the gentleman who told me the story had a sighting out there as well. So it's like one guy has a sighting, he knows two other guys that had a sighting. It's kind of almost like they band together. They don't want to be ridiculed, so they're safe talking to each other about it. But I have not interviewed the two gold miners, but I'd love to. But that's the story of the gold miners.
Fantastic one. It's just one of those behavioral things.
Something we all wish we would just kind of fumble onto and see. I mean, it always makes me wonder how they eat, if they do, if they do that with trees, if they peel them off, or it's just another little piece of the puzzle, I think.